30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
Here we got a roll program.
Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
Live from historic Pearson Field, in cooperation with Aero Maintenance Flight Schools, the pilotintheclassroom.com presents the third Saturday Safety Seminar.
All right, welcome. And we have some people here today at Pearson Field, and hopefully we have many more of you out there in cyberspace. Once again, I'm Brig Williams. I am a flight instructor at Aero Maintenance Flight Schools. I'm also an educator in Southwest Washington. Have a website called pilotintheclassroom.com. I'm also a FAA safety rep. I'm a volunteer for the FAA. Really just trying to keep our general aviation pilots happy and safe and in the air. So today is a retro throwback Saturday. I try to do these about once every quarter. We dig deep back into the safety films of the FAA that were produced in the 60s and the 70s. Back in those days, many of the pilots or actors in Hollywood and producers were all aviation, general aviation pilots as well. Many served in World War II, and they had the resources to create all these great high quality FAA training films. Now, for some of you in younger audience, these might seem very dated. But since the aircrafts that we fly are the same aircrafts that we're flying in the 60s and the 70s and even in the 40s, there's still a lot of good information for us to learn. So this first one, the first one this year that we're going to watch is called Disorientation. And I am going to go ahead and start this. If you're having at home, you're having problems kind of hearing the audio, you can Google this, and there are a couple other people on YouTube that has great qualities of this one. You can also find it on archive.org. So without any further ado, let's watch the FAA Disorientation.
The aerobatic pilot is able to perform flawlessly, even when he knows nothing of the physiological limitations of his inner ear, so long as he has visual reference to the Earth while he scans from side to side. It's only when he loses his visual reference that he becomes subject to the false and dangerous sensations of spatial disorientation. Almost as dangerous and equally as confusing can be any one of the many seemingly harmless visual illusions that may confuse and threaten a pilot's life. You'll discover both the problems and some solutions in this film. The two main causes of pilot disorientation are either vestibular, referring to the inner ear, or visual in nature. We begin with some visual illusions which can affect every pilot, whether he has his instrument ticket or not. So great is our faith in the visual signals we receive that we maintain seeing is believing. A more fitting statement might be what we see is what we think we see. For example, here's something you must do whenever you come in for a landing. Judge the runway length. Looking at the two lines, AY and AX, how much longer is AX? Before answering, let's remove the surrounding terrain. They're actually identical. The only problem in the air is that you can't eliminate the background, and it influences your judgment of what you see. These visual illusions can be observed in many ways. Do the lines A and B look parallel? They are. Your eye bends them. And the fact that your brain is conditioned to think in terms of perspective can play tricks with your ability to discriminate height differences. This one, of course, is a classic. Which post is the tallest? By now, you have the pattern. They are all the same height. How about this one? It introduces another factor, light, or more correctly, shadow. The three large mounds, when turned over, mysteriously appear to have been dense all the time. Actually, all of these aspects of vision, perspective, depth perception, shadows, are critical to the task of flying. They're the visual cues your mind needs and uses to make a successful landing. When landing in the high country, for instance, what looks and feels like a normal glide path, especially at night, may be entirely inadequate if the runway has either an upslope or a downslope. A normal approach to a level runway is about a 3.5 or 4 degree angle, right? No particular problem. However, if you were to use your normal perspective to set up an approach to an upslope runway, you'd be dragging the trees and perhaps not make the runway at all. And if you set up your normal approach to a downslope runway, your glide angle would be excessively steep, and you might very well overshoot because of excessive airspeed. How about the problems of visual cues at night? Here's a simulated runway with lights of different intensities as we turn on final. Most pilots would feel that the aircraft would be level about now. Actually, it's quite a few degrees off, enough to give trouble, particularly in a crosswind. How about the stars at night? Every pilot has mistakenly lined up on one sometime or another. Or the slanting cloud formation that's had you flying in a banked attitude or climbing toward a fictitious horizon. A thoughtful glance at the turn and bank would have told this pilot he was flying with one wing low. And to keep going in a straight line, he was holding opposite rudder. The slip indicated here tells the story. The list of visual illusions is seemingly endless, but the solution is quite simple. Be alert to situations that are potentially disorienting, and then when they seem to contradict your visual sense, do what the gauges say. Trouble really begins when there are no visual references. When we're on the ground, the combined input from several senses tells us which way is up. Sight gives us a frame of reference. We can see where we are in relation to fixed objects. Feeling gravity's pull on our muscles and joints tells us which way is down. And special parts of our inner ear help give us our sense of balance and orientation. In the absence of visual cues, accelerations can be confusing. Their tugs misinterpreted as gravitational pulls. The result is often disorientation or pilot's vertigo. That's why, without adequate instruments and the ability to use them, a pilot should avoid situations where visual references are obscured. No smart pilot would take off in instrument conditions without an IFR rating and the right equipment. But it's the brief and hazardous exposures to IFR conditions that you think you have enough experience to handle that can lead to tragedy. Next to failing to obtain or maintain flying speed, the greatest number of general aviation fatalities are the VFR pilots who continue flight into bad weather. So your best protection is to avoid those perilous weather conditions. And if you do get caught briefly, have the discipline to believe your instruments, not your impulses. We know that when you're getting signals on 3 different sensory channels resulting in a message contrary to what your instruments say, it takes a lot of discipline not to react instinctively. This simple demonstration will change the mind of any skeptic who believes he's immune to the effects of vertigo.
You indicate with the stick the direction that the body sensations tell you that you're turning. To avoid motion sickness and to cut out outside lights and visual reference points, we will blindfold you, and you'll be looking at some blue lights. I'll spin you to the right, but at all times indicate the direction that the body sensations tell you that you're turning.
And you can experience most of the sensations of vestibular disorientation right on the ground. The best way is to attend a local accident prevention clinic.
Notice he indicates that he is slowing down. Stopped. Now he indicates that he's turning to the left. Now at this point, I will accelerate you to the left. And you're really turning to the left now, aren't you, sir? Yes. Would you remove your hood? Unbelievable?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is unbelievable. But by looking at the remarkable mechanics of the inner ear, we can learn how it was able to confuse our subject. We'll be looking at only one set of semicircular canals, although there is a set located on either side of the head, just inside the ear, at about eye level. The 3 canals, each in a different axis, correspond to the roll, pitch, and yaw planes of any good gyro. Let's look at the movement of just one axis as an example. A cutaway of the canal, which would sense angular accelerations in yaw. Shaped something like the shell of a snail, the canal is filled with the fluid. Microscopic hairs embedded in the cupola sense the movement of the fluid. Let's see what happens in our subject's inner ear when he's rotated. Due to inertia, the fluid in the canal lags behind the rotation, thus bending the cupola, and the vestibular nerve transmits a clockwise indication to the brain. As the rotation approaches a constant speed of about 15 RPM, the fluid slowly begins to catch up, all the while giving the impression the subject is slowing down, a false sensation. Had he been kept at a constant 15 RPM for several moments, the cupola would have returned to the vertical position when both fluid and canal rotate at the same speed, giving another false sensation, that of no motion at all. Deceleration causes the subject to sense a counterclockwise turn due to the cupula's tilt in the opposite direction. And when he stops suddenly to 0 RPM, the fluid continues to rush onward, bending the cupola all the way over, indicating a violent turn to the left. What you've just seen isn't just laboratory theory, and it doesn't just apply to inexperienced pilots. Here's Al Hall, on the right, an airline captain with more than $30,000. He's in charge of training his company's 747 pilots. Obviously, if there's anyone who should be able to outguess the seat of his pants, it should be Al. Let's watch and see if our theory is correct.
Al, this probably isn't like flying a 747, but
It's a lot of fun, though.
we have some of the same problems. What we're going to do here is to demonstrate how the senses, how your ear will fool you when you can't see outside the airplane and you don't have any instruments to look at. I'd like to have you put this scarf over your eyes and make sure that you can't see changes of light from the sun. I want you to get your hands and feet off the controls now, and I'm going to put the airplane in a turn. And you'll feel it going into the turn, and then I want you to tell me what you feel.
It feels now like we're rolling into a left turn. Yeah, we're now established at some angle of bank in a left turn, and it appears constant.
Okay.
Just a left turn.
I'm just going to
Still feels
keep
a
the
left
airplane
turn.
stable here. And while we're in this attitude here, Al, would you
Feels like we rolled out of the left turn, man. Real smoothly, though.
Okay, it feels like we rolled
I think
out.
we're in a right turn now.
Okay.
I think we're in just a smooth, that we just roll smoothly around to the right.
Okay, roll your head back, Al, so you were looking up. All right, come forward. And what do you feel like we're doing now?
Feel like we rolled over to the right.
Okay, take your blindfold off.
Oh. Unbelievable. Did we roll from left to right, as I was saying?
All we did was I just rolled the airplane out to level flight, and it's been in level flight all the time. And when you rolled your head back, like you reached for an overhead switch and came forward, you felt like the airplane had gone into a turn to the right and diving. We were still level. What do you think of that?
It's unbelievable.
Yes, it is unbelievable. And if you wish to arrive at your destination safely, remember the inaccuracies of your inner ear. Remember the false sensations you can encounter when you lose visual reference outside your aircraft due to rain, fog, or other phenomenon. And don't forget the pitfalls of visual illusions and how your eyes can deceive you as easily as your inner ear. Briefly put, learn to live with your instruments. It makes good sense.
Hope you enjoyed that. Very well done, in my opinion, especially when when they're using full-size cameras and everything else in there, and the artwork was fantastic. What I would like to do is build upon what we just learned in that video. I'd like to go back to actually a retro FAA slide deck presentation, and which has been abbreviated to a little bit because I think that the video does such a good job talking about spatial orientation. But there's some points that I want to cover a little bit more in this presentation. So let me go ahead and get that open. And can you kind of see that okay from there? All right. Making sure our in-studio audience can see the presentation. So a couple of things when we talk about spatial disorientation. Spatial is pertaining to the space relative to the Earth, right? Where are we in terms of the Earth? And we also, and just like the four forces of flight, we always have weight pulling us down. Disorientation is when we have that loss of that proper bearing, which we literally don't know which way is up. And spatial disorientation is the loss of proper bearing between Earth and sky. So as pilots, it's the spatial disorientation that we are most concerned with. So spatial disorientation falls under visual illusions, and these occur when there's is adequate visual reference, but the visual cues are false or misleading. And then we also have those vestibular illusions that occur when there is not adequate visual reference and you feel changes in your aircraft or attitudes that are false. This is one of the reasons I believe so much that everybody should go through IFR training, at least, to really become proficient on flying on instruments. However, it's mostly rated IFR pilots who are flying VFR, who fly in the clouds, that fail to go back onto instruments. So facts, 14% of all fatal accidents are attributed to spatial disorientation. That's actually a pretty high number. And when a crash occurs where spatial disorientation is the leading contributing factor, it has a 90% fatality rate. So these become loss of control accidents, and one of the things with the FAA safety team that we are always trying to lower is the loss of control accidents in the general aviation population. The average person involved in a fatal spatial disoriented accident is 30 years old male with 10 years and 1,500 hours of flying experience. So not sure why that is, but that's how the numbers break out. We do know that after a while of flying, we become complacent. And I think at that 30 years of age, right, we finally feel like we're in total control of our lives and we're making the great decisions all the time. So we need to be careful. This can happen to anybody. We use our eyes for our primary sense of orientation, and we can't always trust our eyes. Last month, we talked about the Startle Response, and I made some references that we think we know our reality, but there's a lot of other reality going on around us that as human beings, we're not capable of sensing. Our vision is limited to only a certain amount of light rays, so we can only see visible light, and some of those visible lights we can't see. We have blind spots with our eyes. So there's a lot of things that goes on with our sights, even if we have perfect vision. So in the video, they use this example, which line is longer, right? Clearly, to me, it's B, right? When you look at it, it's B, but it's not. They're both the same length, right? In art class, right, how do we do two-dimension to create a three-dimensional feel, right? So we talk about the spacing. So which post is the tallest? Clearly, it's the one on the left. However, they're all equal. This one seems very unfair, but what shape is the farthest away from you? Any takers in the audience?
Well, it looks like the round one, I see.
The round one right here? Yeah, in the middle. When we take away the other shapes, there's no difference. They're just there, right? Now, this actually is now becoming a concern for us in drone operators, because drone operators fall victim to this illusion of where is the drone in relationship to things that are farther away. And with geometry of sight, if they think that they are, an aircraft is approaching and they need to climb because they're above that aircraft, oftentimes they're below and can create a collision hazard. So even our drone pilots can fall victim to this. Which circle is larger, A or B?
Looks like B from here.
From here it looks like B, but in actuality, they're the same. What type of shape would go into the blank areas?
A circle,
Probably a circle, yeah. But also, a square could go in there. So either one. This might be a little harder to see here on this screen, but do you see the gray dots moving around? Yeah, this one doesn't work as well, but those of you playing at home, you should see gray dots in between those squares. And are these shapes distorted? They seem to me. However, they're not. It's just those other lines. One of the things that I get on with students all the time is not cleaning the windscreen because those bug spots can start to distort your vision. And it's important that we have a clean screen. Also, a bug spot could block an aircraft that's only a few miles away that's on a collision course. So having clean windscreens. And when we're coming into land, those can then be affected if there's other issues going on. So here's some of the other retro slides that I had talked about. John, I think maybe this is a situation you might be familiar with that you were telling me, right? At first glance, where do the clouds begin and where do the mountains end, right? Pilots in Alaska or in other snow-ridden places, northern Canada, where is the horizon when you're in a whiteout condition, right? And so these illusions can happen. Everybody in IFR training at some type has hit the false horizons of the clouds, or VFR pilots flying on top, and that's not always the correct horizon. You go into a bank, pretty soon you are in that bank for so long, your inner ears think that you're straight and level, so when you try to come out of that bank, you think you're turning the opposite direction. Confusion of ground lights with stars. Heck, confusions of ground lights and airport lights, right, going into an unfamiliar airport. Hillsborough is a great example of that in the local areas, right? The night flight, sometimes it's very hard to see those runways with all those other lights around it. Depth perception illusions. Kind of hard to see here today in person, but there is a runway there, right? Snow covered in that field. How about this one? I try to teach my students the spot method. You guys use the spot method for landing?
I think so.
Yeah. I always pick one spot and that's what I focus on. I don't really look at anything else. I don't look at the VASIs. I look at that spot. I use that to guide my, my flight path. These visual illusions, especially for landing, are best corrected by learning how to land with the spot method. Just focusing on one spot and making that your aiming point. Not always the geometry of that you're seeing on the runway. I remember a gentleman from my hometown. He flew P-38s in World War II. And he talked about that the P-38 was a wonderful slipping aircraft. And they would come in and just slip and start taking out railroad cars. But they said that they would get target fixation and pilots would slip right into the ground because they were just so focused on getting the hits. And this is that fascination in flying, right? We see this oftentimes in people who are maybe doing photography or aerial surveying. We call it the moose stall or the coyote stall in Texas, where you're so focused on a point on the ground that you get that target fixation and you lose that spatial awareness. The leans, right? We've talked about that. Our inner ear gets adjusted. You think that you're flying straight and level, but you're in the turn. You come out of the turn, you feel like you're turning, so you go back into the other turn. So we have to learn to really trust those instruments. The graveyard spin, which happens when we lose that sensation. We think this is what happened to Kennedy out there on the East Coast. And This is one of those where we, even as VFR pilots, we need to learn to incorporate those scans to make sure that what we're seeing is actually happening with the aircraft.
I think that's what happened to me.
Yeah. So John's here, and he had a situation. Can I talk about that for 1 second? And so flying in, having some visual illusions with smoke going over the mountains, and then ended up in a graveyard spin, was able to recover from it. So not part of the 14% and the lucky 10% of that. But correct me if I'm wrong, John, and I'm saying this so that the audience at home can hear. Your airplane was still totaled though, right?
Right.
Because
Structural damage, yeah.
structural damage from the G-forces of those spins. Structural illusions happen especially at night coming into land when we have coming out of the clouds, rain, smoke, haze. Last weekend we had a lot of smoke in the area. We had 6 miles visibility. Now for a lot of people, oh, 6 miles, that's great. Flying 6 miles visibility. It is not like 10 miles, right? And it starts to get hard to see things that you normally take for granted. So when we're flying in rain, landing in rain, that structural illusions can catch that unsuspecting pilot. So when you're coming into those situations, you need to remember your training. You need to brief for that in your pre-landing checklist. We talk about traditional risk management. The joke is when we solo a student, we give them an empty bag of experience and a full bag of luck. And it's their job to fill their bag of experience before they run out of luck. Unfortunately, this doesn't make for the greatest risk management, because a lot of the times we put ourselves into some risk, and depending upon the outcome, if we get out of it okay, that's an acceptable risk. And that's probably not the best way to look at it. So, we look at behavior and outcome, right? I touched that stove, it's hot, maybe I won't do it again. I touched the stove, it's cold, maybe I will touch it again. That's not a great way to learn how to fly and manage risk. So experience does not necessarily mean a pilot has developed good risk management. Experienced pilots tend to have a long list of risk situations that they have learned are not acceptable, but without no risk management procedures, experienced pilots have no protections from unanticipated risk situations. So remember that we start to lose a lot of margin of safety as our tasks become more complicated in the aircraft. During approach, especially on landings and takeoffs, our task loads are always the highest, and that is where we are at the greatest risk of having a loss of control accident. So we want to think, when we start coming into those amber ranges, when we're starting to get into those higher risk situations, we need to be very conscious about how we're flying our aircraft and our margins of safety. And we want to try to stay in that green range, right, where we still are getting optimal performance, but we're taking moderate risk. I warn new pilots often coming into Pearson of really anticipating that base to final turn, because we have that restriction that we can't fly over the water. We also have that restriction that we can't go above 700 feet over the extended runway centerline. When we get a strong north wind, an unsuspecting pilot, because I know it's happened to myself, you come in and you start that turn because we're such creatures' habits of coming into Pearson. Next thing you know, you're being blown out towards the river. So what do? Right? You tighten the turn, right? The best situation is to fly over the field below 700 feet, come back in, try it again, right? Don't put yourselves into those amber and those red areas, because if you're then having a strong wind and maybe you have lower visibility, it's raining, you have those optical illusions. If it's at night, you start adding those risk factors. Last week we talked about our brain development, and this also holds true for our spatial awareness. If we get into a situation where we become disoriented, that amygdala takes over, and it gives us that kind of the startled response, and everything kicks in and we want to do things that are instinctual, right? My body is designed to be on the planet being forced down by 1G at all times, and I feel I am in a left-hand turn, I'm going to make a right-hand turn, right? Which might not be the best decision. The first thing that we need to do is actually look at our instruments and see what's going on. So we have a lot of different risk calculators now out there. The FAA has them, AOPA has them, because sometimes it's difficult to know the real odds are for a particular flight. The risks of flying are vague and indefinite, and in a pilot's mind, the benefit of taking a risk is specific, real, and tangible. When the risk is vague and the benefits are specific, we don't do a good job of making those decisions, right? Those get there itis, I gotta do this, those external pressures when we talk about risk management. So we want to start getting some bedrocks and principles, our discipline, our skill, and our proficiency level. I can't stress this enough, to train with a CFI and get positive feedback. Work on those basics even if you're flying all the time in your own aircraft. We talk about the pilot, the aircraft, the environment, and external factors when we're talking about risk management. And that's built upon our proficiency, skill, and our discipline, and is anchored by our ability to maintain situational awareness, and then lastly, using all that to make sound judgments. Sometimes those best judgments is not to do the flight at all. The other times that judgment is micro, and which is the best move do I need to make right now as we're continuing on. Make sure our pilots are always fit for that flight. You have the experience, you have the training, you have the recency, you have the currency. Your aircraft is capable, your aircraft is up to date, your instruments are working well, right? And then start worrying about that environment. We now have these new maps all around. They use a Raspberry Pi, they hook up these LED lights, and it's a sectional map, and it'll tell you, are things VFR, marginal VFR, or IFR? And we have them here at the flight school. And it is so difficult for me to get through new pilots that green does not mean go. Just because your airport is green and the other ones around you are marginal with a blue color and the other ones there are red, that is not good flying weather. You're going to get caught. All of those marginal VFR, limited IFR, those are all for IFR calculations on for carrying fuel, right? Can you make the approach in visual conditions? Doesn't mean that you're going to be flying in VMC for the majority of your flight. So that environment, when we are taking a look at spatial awareness, becomes so important to really understand what weather is doing. And then mitigating that with those external factors, their itis and all those other things. That's it. That's the presentation for today. I do always remind people that to get into simulators with an instructor so that we can put you into VFR, into IMC, that we can do some other spatial awareness. Get up with an instructor so we can put you on the hood and get you into those turns and then ask you to move your heads and to actually feel what those sensations feels like. There's a lot of training that can go on to prepare you for a disorientating situation and more importantly, how to stay out of them. Let me just go ahead and make a small adjustment here. And from my studio audience today, do you have any other questions before we end the session online? Comments or concerns? Okay. And I want to wish everybody else, please fill out the form that's below the video on the website. You can still earn credit for up to 1 week after this is published today. And everyone, please get up with an instructor, get those 3 flight activities done, get that next phase of wings completed, and we'll see you next month in, I guess that would be November, right? Right before Turkey Day. So everybody have a great day.